So thank you everyone so much for joining the next installment of our Software and Content Thought Leadership series. My name is Tina Centris and I work for Innovation Partnerships. And I'm very happy to be bringing you a wonderful panel of speakers today to talk about Creative Commons licenses, unlocking access to enhance the reach of your research. So a little bit of backstory about Innovation Partnerships. Innovation Partnerships serves to help amplify the impact of research at the University of Michigan, whether that be through licensing, creating a startup venture from research, or releasing researchers' work open source, which is going to be the topic of today's webinar. One of the ways that we help researchers do this is we have a new initiative that our office is launching called MOSS, Michigan Open Source Software, but it's also applicable for content. And it's a pilot initiative to support open source projects with promotion and community development with the goal of helping equip teams so that they can sustain an active community of users within the kind of research outputs that they've created. If you'd like to learn more about this initiative, please get in touch with us. There's a website on the screen as well as some resources and tools and other materials that we have on that website. And you can get in touch with myself and my colleague Ashwathi, who would be more than happy to help you with your research outputs. Another part of the resources that we're helping researchers with is with this webinar series. So we've called it Software and Content Thought Leadership Series. So this is just one webinar in an installment of regularly occurring webinars. We generally have one or two every semester. All the past recordings from these webinars can be found on our website here, and we're going to be updating this website in the future with more tools and resources to support researchers such as yourselves who are developing software and content materials. So our next topic will be in the winter semester, and so keep a lookout on your emails for the next installment. And with that, I'm super pleased to be able to introduce to you today our speakers. So first we have Dr. Cable Green. Dr. Green is the Director of Open Education at Creative Commons. He works with open education science research communities to leverage open licensing, content practices, and policies to expand equitable access and contributions to open education. And next, we'll have two speakers from the Michigan Institute for Clinical and Health Research, which is kind of abbreviated to MICHR. MICHR is leading the way in building the field of translational science with the intent of extending life and reducing the impact of illness and disability. Joining us from MICHR, we have two of their team members. We have Brenda Eakin, who's their program manager, and Claire Sandsburn, who's their instructional designer. And Brenda and Claire, I have the privilege to work with and help them on their open sourced program materials and content that they've been helping release open source for users who use their materials that they've developed. So they're going to be telling us about their story and their experience. So as I said earlier, please feel free to use the Q&A. I'm going to turn it over to Cable, and then after he's done speaking, Brenda and Claire will go next. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tina. I'll go ahead and get my slides up here. How does that look? It's good? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Cable Green. I want to thank Tina and the University of Michigan for inviting me, especially because my wife and I did our doctorates at Ohio State. And so we genuinely appreciate the warm hospitality. I'll talk today just briefly about CC licenses. We don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to stay pretty high level. Please do ask any specific questions that you might have, and we're happy to get to those. And if we run out of time today, happy to talk later as well. All of these slides are licensed under a CC BY license. I've provided them to the crew here, and they'll share them out later. So no need to take notes. You can all have a copy of the slides. So I work at Creative Commons. We are an international nonprofit organization. We are 23, almost 24 years old. And we are focused on building a world where education, culture, and science are equitably shared as a means to benefit humanity. So we start at that very high level, and you'll see that theme kind of working its way through this talk as well. The licenses, which I'll talk about in a minute, are free to use. Some people think you have to pay to use CC licenses. You don't. They're free. We've actually dedicated them to the public domain, so they're forever. The licenses have been proven over time. They've never lost in a court of law. They work all around the world. They're harmonized to copyright around the planet. So if you openly license a work in one country, it can be used in another. They're built on top of and respect copyright laws. So the licenses do not give up copyright. You keep your copyright and you add a license. We work with lots of partners and creators all over the planet, and have done so for the past 2+ decades. So when I talk, so we're here talking about open access research primarily, but before I get into open education or open access research or open science practices or open data or open source software, whatever the topic might be, I always like to ground the conversation in this, which is, why do we do what we do? Why are we talking about sharing open access research? Why is it important? And at Creative Commons, we start with this question: what are the world's greatest challenges? Like, what do we want to be working on? What's worthy of our time? And when we look to the world's greatest challenges, we look at this list. This is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of these goals. They look like this if you haven't seen them. Number 4 is quality education. It's where a lot of us work at universities and at nonprofits that focus on education. But you can see there's lots of other challenges. And we have a very simple thesis that is, if you want to solve any of these big problems, take your pick. The knowledge and the culture about them must be open. The knowledge about them, the educational resources, the scientific research, the data, the anything that might be helpful, handouts, news reports, all of this needs to be open. So that we know about these problems. We can educate about these problems and challenges. We can teach people, we can discuss solutions, we can share scientific theories and research and data to actually get at solutions for these. The converse is also true. If we don't share the knowledge and the culture about these problems, we're much less likely to solve these big challenges. So that's kind of the grounding for where we work. And I think for most of this conversation. So of course we have these tools. These are legal tools this is mostly what CC is known for. We have 6 open copyright licenses and 2 public domain tools. The licenses are made up of one of 4 conditions: attribution, share alike, non-commercial, and no derivatives. Attribution, you have to give credit or cite somebody's work. Share alike, if you take my work and modify it, make an adaptation of it, you must share your adapted work under the same terms as my original license. So think Wikipedia, everything's under BIA-SA. You have to, as you make edits to Wikipedia, your edits are also BIA-SA. NC, non-commercial, you can't use my work primarily for commercial purposes. And then ND, no derivatives, you can make changes for your own personal use, but you can't share those changes with anybody else. And so for all intents and purposes, you can't modify the work. You can't make an adaptation. In science and education, we try to stay away from ND as much as we can because educators change stuff. Scientists want to remix materials. They want to text and data mine. We want to do all these things that the ND and even some of the other license conditions can make more difficult. And so generally speaking, I'll talk about this later, but generally speaking, we want to be toward the least restrictive licenses that we can use on both content and data. Our public domain tools, the first one is called CC0. This is actually giving up one's copyright and dedicating a work to the public domain. This is very popular with data sets. Most data is already in the public domain. Facts about nature, for example, are not copyrightable in the first place. But to be sure and to be clear that scientific data sets are in the worldwide public domain, a lot of people use CC0. The public domain dedication, which is the second one on the right, that's a mark to say, hey, this is already in the public domain, and I'm telling the world that it is by putting this mark on it. So the licenses and the public domain tools provide perpetual, irrevocable permission. So this is really important. Perpetual, the license lasts for the term of copyright, and when copyright expires, the work goes into the public domain, and so you can use it forever forever. Irrevocable, once you put a license on something, you can't take it back. This is really important for education, for research, everything we do in science, because of course we build on the work of others. And if somebody could reach in and take back something that was in your course at the University of Michigan, for example, that would be a problem. You'd be left with a big hole in your course or your degree program. And so this is how the licenses are designed. We very proudly say that we put the open in open access research and open educational resources and open data. Basically, the world uses Creative Commons licenses to make knowledge open. It's kind of the default licensing tool that's used. Going a bit deeper into how we organize our open knowledge work at CC, and these are some principles that I'm sharing with you because this may be something you want to think about at U of M. You might want to think about it in your own decisions that you make, and you might want to talk with some of your funders about this as well. So these are when we're helping national governments or foundations or others work on policy, or when we're advising institutions, universities, and others, these are the types of things we talk about. First, that publicly funded knowledge should be openly licensed by default, that data should be put in the public domain with CC0, and there should be a zero embargo period, meaning when the public pays for something, the public should have immediate and open access to the thing that they paid for. Educational resources, research software, hardware, data, whatever it is. If it's copyrightable, the public should have access to it. By the way, I'll speak for myself. I feel the same way about patents. When the US government funds a new drug, like we heavily funded some of the COVID drugs, I believe those patents should also be in the public, but that's another presentation for another day. CC deals with copyright, not other forms of intellectual property law. Second, public funds allocated to produce open knowledge should be spent as efficiently and effectively as possible to maximize the public good. And so really the point here is that public stewards of public money, procurement officers of public K-12 schools, the US Department of Education, the US National Science Foundation, should use all of the tools that they have at their disposal to use the public money as they give out grants and contracts to maximize public good. And one of the easiest things they can do is to require an open license on the outputs of public funds. So for example, if you take a grant from the US Department of Labor or the US Department of Education, or from multiple US aid grants, or some NSF programs, some NIH programs, you have to openly license what you produce. On research, of course, the US government has the Nelson Memo, which covers all US agencies that fund research, and they have a whole nother set of requirements for sharing data, for publishing openly so the public can get access to it with zero embargo. Third, publicly funded knowledge should be stewarded by public institutions, the academy, and or trusted nonprofits. So I bring this up because right now in Cape Town, South Africa, is the third Diamond Open Access Conference that's happening. And what they're talking about essentially, just to be blunt about it, is we, the academy, have to stop turning over our research, that most of it is publicly funded, to commercial entities to house, to sell back to us, sell services back to us. We actually need, because we're funding research with public money, because many of the peer reviewers are at public institutions and are not paid for their peer review services, because we are the producers of this knowledge and we pay for it, that we should actually host it, make sure that the rights stay with the authors, et cetera. And we should not turn that over. We should not transfer our copyright to commercial entities. And so that's the conversation that's happening in Diamond Open Access and other areas of the open access movement. Equity, easy to say, equity should be at the core of any open knowledge model. So as we're thinking about new models of production, of hosting, of sharing, we should think about equity, social justice, making sure that we're building systems that truly include everyone and that everyone has a voice. We, of course, in open access started out, you had to be rich to read. We had to pay high subscription fees, and if you were an institution that didn't have a lot of money, you didn't have access to all the journals. Then we switched to you had to be rich to write with article processing charges. And so we need to get out of those bad models because they're inequitable. If you don't have a lot of money, you can't fully participate. Diamond Open Access is trying to get to a better model and is centering equity in their conversations. Commercialist organizations, we may want to work with them, but when we do, they should be treated by public institutions and the academy as work for hire. We should hire them through competitive procurement processes, get the best service at the best price, but we should not be turning over our copyright of our articles, for example, to them. We should buy what we need, but own what we buy, and then share what we own. And then last, the copyright of publicly funded knowledge should be held by the authors and or the public institutions that funded the knowledge. Copyright should not be transferred to commercial publishers. That goes for open access research, goes for open education resources. If we pay for something with public money, the public should keep it. It's really that simple. And so just to kind of ground us a bit more, when I run into difficult conversations with people about, oh, I can't share my works, or I have to publish in this for-profit journal for citation index or whatever it might be, I try to go back to these core questions. Why do we teach? Like, you didn't get into teaching to get rich. So there are better careers to do that. You probably did it because you want to help students, and you probably want to help as many students as possible learn, become critical thinkers, become more thoughtful members of society. Why do we do science? We're trying to solve problems. We're trying to learn. We're trying to learn about the universe. We're trying to learn about people. We're trying to learn about the way systems work. Why do we publish research? A lot of the same reasons. And so, we have tools today. We have digital, we have the internet, we have open licensing. We've got these amazing tools where we can do these things at scale better than we ever could before. And I think if there's one takeaway that I want you to have is that knowledge is a public good. Knowledge shouldn't be a private good. It shouldn't be expensive. It shouldn't be something that only the rich get access to. And so I would suggest that we need to push. We need to not think about open as a nice thing we do, or something that's optional, or it's an added thing that we're just kind of doing to everything else we already do and just go with the flow. We need to actually really lean into open. And so finally, I'm going to come to open access after that setup. So here are many of the things that come up in open access discussions. You probably do all these already, but if you're new to open access, hopefully this is helpful. First thing, I mentioned that we work with funders, both governments and foundations, and help them create open license funding requirements. So if you take a grant from the Gates Foundation, for example, to do health research, you have to publish your article under a CC BY license, and you have to share your data openly. And there's a zero embargo period, and they help you do all that. And so the first thing you should be asking when you're doing research is there a funding requirement to make this open access? Of course, you don't have to have a funding requirement. You can choose as an author to make your work open as well. Second, keep your rights, right? Retain your copyright. Make sure that if you're publishing into a commercial journal, do not turn your copyright over to them. You keep your copyright, and your team at U of M can help you use an author's addendum where you give some rights to the journal so that they can publish, but you keep your copyright. You don't want to give that up. You also want to make sure the journal's not taking away your right to, say, publish in a green repository, like an institutional repository. So you want to retain the rights you need to do the things that you need to do with your work. We are big fans of preprints and preprint servers. We've actually got a project going on right now where we're working with both funders to require that preprints be published before the final article is published, and that those preprints be licensed CC BY, so people can text it and data mine them and do can translate them and do other things that they need to do as they're learning. When you have the final article, we recommend that you CC license that article and use a license that allows for adaptations to be made. CC BY is kind of the default that the open access movement tends to use, and certainly we recommend. Or some people put it in the public domain. That's less common. We typically recommend keep your copyright and put a CC BY license on it. For data, you've heard me say a couple times now, put your data into the public domain using CC0. Make sure that where you publish provides no cost access. There's no paywall to get access to read your research. And also that there's no embargo period. So many journals will say, yeah, we'll do open access, but after 6 months or after 12 months or whatever. And our answer should be, no, it's immediately available. So these are some of the factors that go into, or decision points that go into thinking about how you want to publish as open access. So I think I'm out of time. I'm eager to hear from the other speakers and jump into conversation. I would just say we've got big problems. That list of the Sustainable Development Goals is huge, and it's going to require a lot of research, a lot of education, a lot of learning. And the faster we can open up that knowledge, the faster we'll get to solve those big problems. Thanks very much. Back to you, Tina.
Thank you, Cable. So Brenda and Claire, it's up to you next.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Tina, for inviting us to talk about our education programs that we have through Mishar. I'm Brenda Aiken. I'm the Director of Education, Mentoring, and Workforce Development Programs at Mishar, and my colleague Claire Sandsburn is here as well today. We're going to talk to you a little bit about the examples of how we've used Creative Commons licenses for our work and how we're tasked by the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, that funds Mishar, with making these resources openly available. But before we get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about Mishar because some of you might not know who we are. So next slide, please. So Mishar is funded by the National Institutes of Health. It's one of their institutes called the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. We love our acronyms at NCATS and at the NIH. So if I speed over an acronym and you aren't familiar with what it is, please put a comment in there and I'd be happy to go back and explain that. Through our Clinical and Translational Sciences Award, we are tasked with developing and demonstrating innovations in the translational process. We also are tasked with sharing these innovations nationally and internationally, and we are tasked with delivering more health solutions to more people more quickly. Next slide. So Mishar was first awarded its Clinical and Translational Sciences Award in 2007. So we haven't been around quite as long as CC, but close. And we've been supporting researchers across the University of Michigan ever since. We sit administratively in the medical school, but we like to say that the M in Mishar stands for Michigan. It doesn't stand for medical school. We're here to help everyone across the university. We're part of a consortium of more than 60 NIH-funded academic institutions across the country, and you can see where they are here in this map. The goal of the CTSA is to work together to improve the process of translational research and get more treatments to all people more quickly. Next slide. So from 2007 to 2021, NCATS had tasked all the CTSAs with advancing translational research. Now, as you can see here, there are thousands of diseases, but only 1/10 of them have treatments. And the process of moving new treatments into practice takes a very, very long time. So especially in 2020, it became very clear that we needed a new process, a new way to move the treatments that are being developed and brought into practice much more quickly. And so NCATS changed its mission for the CTSAs, and they charged us with improving translational science in a new way. Next slide. So our new mission is not translational research, it is now translational science. And you might be thinking, isn't that the same thing? It sounds like the same thing, but it's really not. Translational research is the process of advancing disease-specific discoveries from the lab to the real world. Think COVID vaccines. But translational science is the process of increasing the speed, the efficiency, and the impact of research. In other words, we're tasked with finding roadblocks in research and then finding ways to overcome those. Next slide, please. NCATS has developed 8 pillars of translational science, and these are fundamental to the work of everyone who has a clinical and translational sciences award. But today we're going to focus on just 3 of them that apply to Creative Commons. Next slide. So the main drivers of our work in the education and mentoring group at MSHAR are to identify training gaps and inform opportunities to advance translational science, to develop innovative resources, trainings, tools, and other types of educational resources to address these gaps with a specific lens toward generalizability, and then to widely share that knowledge, those best practices, and all the lessons that we've learned with an emphasis on accessibility and inclusion, which fits beautifully into Creative Commons. Next slide.
So to that end, here's a snapshot of what we've produced in 2023. In 2023, MSHAR provided over 3,500 unique services for almost 2,400 clients and over 100 dissemination activities. So our group's contribution to that output involves creating and revising research resources for all members of the research team. We do this by developing and improving workshops, online learning, and opening access to resources. And this slide just gives you a sample of some of the trainings that we've built and created. And to disseminate these, we're basically using 2 different types of Creative Commons licenses. For trainings that are going directly to the learner, for example, we build online courses that we push out to anyone with a link. So those we are keeping with the CC by NC/ND because we want the learner to go through the course as we design it. But we want any learner who's interested in the information or on any type of research team to be able to access it. And we also produce a lot of training materials that are for other educators or administrators to build their own training programs. For example, we create guides to creating an effective mentorship program or things along those lines. Those we want the user to adapt to the needs of their institution. So those are the types of resources that we're using the CC by NC. So we are grant funded, so we need to make sure that our trainings are not used commercially and that we have attribution. So we're here today because we've developed a strong relationship with innovation partnerships, working together with the goal of sharing our trainings widely and freely, using Creative Commons licenses to protect the integrity of the content and to make it widely available. When we have a new or revised training resource, we connect with innovation partnerships to set up the licensing, and they make it very easy with a simple process, a form, a meeting, and a quick collaboration. We also share our materials on our MSHAR website to house the resources to provide more access. And we also build online courses, as I mentioned before. And so those are often housed in learning management systems. We use specifically Canvas or MyLink, which is an specific LMS. So when we share these, if you in the Canvas course specifically, they can be open access. You can have anyone with a link, even if you don't have a Canvas subscription, even if you're not in an institution, there are ways to make those courses public and widely available. And so those are the types of trainings that we will use the CC by NC/ND. And Brenda will talk about another portal that we use to disseminate our trainings.
Right. So I'd like to tell you guys about the Diamond Portal, which is an online compendium of training programs. Now, Diamond is one of those fabulously tortured NIH acronyms that stands for the Development, Implementation, and Assessment of Novel Training in Domain-Based Competencies. You can see why we call it Diamond. It was launched in 2018 in a collaborative effort with the University of Michigan, the University of Rochester, the Ohio State University, and Tufts University. Basically, we were all together at a conference and discovered that we all have fabulous training materials that are sitting only on our university sites. And wouldn't it be great if we could share them all, not only with the CTSA consortium, but around the world in a way that makes it accessible to everyone? And thus Diamond was born. It is a digital collection of training resources specifically for research study teams. It is crowdsourced. It is also federated. So it's an online catalog of training materials. Materials themselves are not housed on Diamond. What we house are the links to them. So everyone keeps their own copyrights. But we provide a way to organize and make all of those training materials available. In 2023, the University of Michigan acquired Diamond by itself, and we updated it to have new features that allow users to tag items for flexible searching, to create and share customized playlists, and also ways that they can incorporate Diamond resources into individualized training plans. Next slide. So Diamond has a very, very broad reach. Right now, this is actually a little bit of an outdated slide. We have actually over 300 training items on Diamond right now. 90% of them are free to all users, and more than 80% of them are fully digital online training programs. So they're available in a very, very broad reach. 60% of them approximately are introductory, but they're all at various learning levels. Over the last month, we've had about 3,000 unique visitors to Diamond. We've had more than 500 new visits just in the past month, and we've got visitors from all 75 countries around the world. You can see this map. The darker areas are the places where we get more traffic to the site. We're working on Greenland. If you guys know any researchers in Greenland, let us know, and we'll let them know Diamond is available. You can reach out to Diamond through diamondportal.org. It's freely available to anyone, anytime. And it helps us expand our reach into the service mission of making training available. Many, many, many of the items on Diamond have Creative Commons licenses, so they are freely available for anyone. Next slide. So if you need to contact us, this is how you can reach out to us at Mishar. You can find information about our training programs on our website. You can email us. We are on X and LinkedIn and Curious and all the other kinds of electronic sites. And we would love to be able to help you with your questions and help you with your research.
Tina, you're muted.
Thank you, Brenda and Claire. That was beautiful. Sorry, I feel like, you think that you know how to use Zoom and then you forget sometimes. I'm just changing the view so hopefully our attendees are seeing, maybe I'll change it to gallery so everyone can see. So thank you so much. Also to Cable, your presentations were all great, and I'm hoping that our attendees learned a lot. Ashwathi and I are now going to lead kind of the Q&A portion of the webinar. So Ashwathi, do you want to have the first one?
Sure. I think this is a question for Cable, or Cable, it says that you're going to answer this live. Do you recommend applying for copyright in addition to CC licenses, or does a CC license mean that the material is copyrighted?
Yeah, good question. We have to back up a little bit though, because the question doesn't quite sync with law. So the way that copyright works in the United States is that the moment that you have a work in a fixed tangible medium of expression is what it's called. So here I wrote down Tina's name on this piece of paper. This work is automatically copyrighted under US copyright law. I don't have to apply for copyright. I don't have to do anything. I own the copyright because there's text here and it's under a fixed tangible medium of expression. That's also true if I took a picture with my phone right now, it's immediately copyrighted. So you don't have to apply for copyright. That law was updated a few decades ago. So no need to do that. Some people do, but it tends to be, music artists or somebody that wrote a book where they want to make sure that it's on record with the US Copyright Office if they foresee a lawsuit potentially. But for the rest of us, we don't need to worry about that. Our copyright is automatic the moment you produce something. So that's the first part of the answer. And then because you have the copyright, one of the rights that you have is you can openly license your work to others. And CC licenses are standard open copyright licenses that work all around the world. And so once you have copyright, and you can put a license on it. It's that simple. If you work at an institution like U of M, and I don't know what their policies are, but let me share my experience. When I was at Ohio State and I was faculty there, the rules, at least when I was there, was that I held copyright as the author of my courses, but the university also got copyright to it. And they could openly license or not, and I could openly license or not. Different institutions have different laws. At Creative Commons, I have a contract that says everything I produce as an employee is owned by Creative Commons. So I actually don't have copyright on the slides that I just shared you. Creative Commons owns that per the contract, the employment contract. And then Creative Commons has a policy that says everything that their employees produce is under a CC BY license, and we share those works publicly. And so that's something to look at as well. If you work, most of us work for somebody, you should look at your employment contract and see who owns what you produce when you're on the job. And universities are notoriously large, and different parts of the university sometimes has different rules. So I've worked with universities, for example, where they say, whatever you build, the university owns. I've seen joint copyright ownership like I had at Ohio State. I've seen universities say you own everything and we own nothing. And I've seen the universities say we own everything and you own nothing. And so it's important to take a look at your contract. If you have questions, ask your team, ask your manager, ask your legal department. They'll tell you what the rules are. And then once you know, it's important to know. And then you can go into a conversation about, as the author of this work, I'd really like to see it openly licensed. How can we make that happen? And that's a good way to approach it.
Yeah, thanks, Cable. And just for the U of M folks on the webinar, our copyright policy is basically that faculty owned scholarly work. So any copyrightable material that they create in connection with their teaching or research scholarship. So that includes things like course materials and publications. But if it's copyrightable material that is created as part of, a sponsored research agreement, whether it's federally funded or industry sponsored, or it's a deliverable under a contract, that copyright is owned by the university. So the next question. So this one I did answer, I typed out an answer, but it was basically, it asked, can you discuss if or how CC0 is or is not consistent with sponsor obligations in research and how to manage it? So I did answer I put down a detailed answer in the Q&A function, but the gist is that we typically do not recommend CC0 licenses for university-owned copyrightable materials. So these are things that would be, deliverables under a research grant, created as part of an industry-sponsored research or federally sponsored research grant. Because the CC0 licenses, entail waiving our rights in the worldwide under copyright law. So that, just makes it inconsistent with our copyright policy. For federally funded research, our BIDOL obligations to the government don't allow us to just unilaterally waive our rights by just releasing it under CC0. And then the third thing, which I think is also important for researchers, is attribution is really important. And because the CC0 waives all of our rights, it doesn't impose a requirement to attribute, and Cable, correct me if I'm wrong on that. So because of these reasons, we do recommend, we support open source 100%, but we recommend the other CC licenses for content. And then for software, it's the standard OSI approved licenses, or a few other emerging licenses for specific use cases.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to be clear, CC0 is not a license. CC0 is a public domain dedication. So you're actually giving up your copyright, like you said. You are correct that if something's in the public domain, whether it's there naturally because copyright expired on the work, or it's there because somebody applied CC0, there is not a legal obligation to provide attribution. That's true. The norms that have developed in the academy are that we still give attribution to works that are in the public domain, because not giving attribution is called plagiarism, and we don't like that in the academy, and so we don't do that. So typically, even when works are in the public domain, whether it's a image or a text or a data set, whatever it might be, the best practice and the common norm is still to provide attribution. Last thing I'll say about CC0 is, in education, we tend not to use it for content very much. We like to keep our copyright and put a license on a work, but it's very popular with data. And the reason for that is data sets tend to, well, first of all, most data, especially in the United States, is not copyrightable in the first place. And if it's not copyrightable, that means it's in the public domain. And if it's in the public domain, it's good to be clear that it's in the worldwide public domain. So a lot of people don't know that different jurisdictions, including the United States legal jurisdiction, have their own public domains. So we actually have a US public domain, and other countries have their own public domains. Public domain is not global by default. And so what CC0 does is it puts something into the global public domain, which is, as scientists, probably our intent, right? We want to share the data set everywhere. I was on a meeting yesterday with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they are developing new open source tools and content for identifying sea creatures that are really deep. And of course, the sea is not just for the United States, the ocean is everywhere. And so they want to make sure that their data is as permissible as possible, and their content is as well, so they can cooperate internationally. And so CC0 tends to be used for data sets. The other reason it's really important with data is that if you think about content, we're usually working with a fairly limited set. So if we're building a course, maybe we work with 50 or 100 different sources. Well, that's reasonable to attribute. Like, we can actually get our arms around attributing 100 sources. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. When we're dealing with, like, we're running a project right now on open climate data, and we're dealing with NOAA and Copernicus out of Europe, and these data sets that literally have trillions and trillions of bits of data in them. And the idea of, putting attribution on a trillion different things, you'd spend the rest of your life doing it and never finish. And so how do we think about attribution in different ways to still give credit where credit is due, but realize that mechanically and just tactically speaking, there are certain advantages to getting works into the public domain, so that we can be a bit more flexible on how we give attribution around huge data sets, which frankly we're going to need when we're dealing with AI, when we're dealing with AI training data sets, when we're dealing with solving any of the SDGs, because the data around all of the SDGs are massive and international.
Thank you. Okay, well, I just had a question that wasn't in the Q&A, but was from me. Is Creative Commons working on any licenses around AI and the use of using materials in training, or explicitly not saying you can use this for training, but it is open?
Yeah, so that's a whole nother presentation. I'll give you just the highlights. So let me start by saying a lot of this is still unknown. There are a lot of court cases still pending. One of the big questions is, can AI providers in different legal jurisdictions, but let's just talk about the United States, can they scrape all of our copyrighted content and all of our openly licensed content without permission, without providing attribution? If they can use it under fair use, then the answer is yes, because fair use is a limitation and exception to copyright, and that would allow them to essentially bypass copyright. And if you're bypassing copyright, you're bypassing the open copyright licenses. And therefore the licenses are null and void, copyright doesn't matter, I'm using it under fair use. That's the argument that the AI providers are using in court when they're talking about their training data sets. Like the New York Times, for example, has sued OpenAI and others to say, you've scraped our stuff, it's copyrighted, you can't do it. AI providers are saying in court, we can do it because it's fair use. Other countries have fair dealing rights across the Commonwealth, for example, that are similar. There's also some jurisdictions, the European Union has a new opt-out provision where if you're a citizen of the EU, you can say I'm opting out of training data sets, and that's going to have legal backing to it. We don't have that in the United States. The US Copyright Office has come out and said whatever machines produce, whatever AI produces and creates outputs is not copyrightable, which is an interesting statement. It's not really useful because AI, at least today, is not creating things all on its own. Humans are involved. So, if I go to ChatGPT, I'm typing in a prompt. And so that was an act by a human. Was it a creative act? Does it garner me copyright on the outputs of what's coming out of ChatGPT because I put the prompt in? Unknown. That court case hasn't been brought yet, but that's going to be really important in open access research and OER because we're going to want to know that question. You asked about projects we're working on. We're in 2025, we'll be working on what we call preference signals. So the idea, if you're a coder, you're familiar with robots.txt that you can put on your webpage that says, don't crawl my website, Google. This would be kind of like that. It would be code, metadata that you could say, hey, so here's my open access research article. I'm putting a CC BY license on it, and I'm putting a preference signal on it. And my preference signal says, I don't want this to go into a training data set, or I do want it to go into a training data set, or I'm okay with it going into a training data set, but only if I receive attribution, or only if it's used non-commercially. And so it's another way of sending signals. In the United States at this point, those kinds of signals would not be legally backed. We'd have to set them up as norms with the AI providers to say, hey, we're the people who engage in the commons are sending new signals about how they want their works to be used or not used in AI, and we want you to honor that. You should, as a good citizen of the AI ecosystem. To be determined how all that plays out. Another thing that we will be talking about is what advice do we provide to governments as they're creating new laws. And so if we build preference signals, for example, you could imagine we might go to governments and say, you should require AI companies to honor preference signals, and there should be legal repercussions if they don't. So the European Union's already going down that path. So it's a very complicated space right now. One of the things that we'll be doing in early 2025 is working with other organizations like WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and other UN organizations that have a keen interest in these questions about, how does this work in all the various sectors of open? And we'll be creating guidelines and Q&A and, training documents and things like that to help clarify the space a bit. But to be totally honest, a lot of this, we got to wait for the court cases to sort themselves out. And we're going to have to see what governments do as they enact new laws and policies. So it's a very fluid space.
Well, thank you for taking that question. I know it was a meaty one, and I'm glad that you answered it. There was one question that Claire answered just kind of in the Q&A. They were asking if people could access the courses and the Diamond portal that we were mentioning, and the links to that are in the chat, and we can also share them when we send out the recording and then in the video description when the recording gets posted eventually. So we'll make sure that you'll be able to access Claire and Brenda and the Mishar group's work, and we would encourage you to do so and go explore that and reach out to them if you have any questions or if you want to access it. The next question, I suppose I can also kind of ask Brenda and Claire about, but there's kind of two. It says, does U of M require open source? Is it possible that that would happen? And then asking about kind of professors' opinion. I'm going to touch upon this a little bit. The university would like to honor what researchers want to have happen with their work. So if research teams want to pursue open source, Ashwathi and I and the rest of the team are kind of available to help researchers pursue that goal. If they want to pursue another goal for their work, or if it needs some commercial investment in order for it to be more widely adopted, we also help researchers pursue that role. So Claire and Brenda, do you guys want to speak to a little bit about maybe Mishar's opinion on any of these, or is there a culture in your research group that you'd like to share with us?
Well, we are federally funded, so the federal government tells us that our stuff has to be open source, and we honor that because we like our federal funding. I don't think that it's ever been a problem. What has happened in our experience is that many of the faculty members that we work with aren't aware of what open source is. And so we've been really grateful, Tina, for your guidance to help us explain to faculty what open source actually means, and more importantly, what it doesn't mean. Because it doesn't mean randomly giving up your stuff to everybody everywhere. So there are guidelines around it, and we appreciate Innovation Partnerships helping us explain that.
Awesome. Well, we had a couple more that were submitted when people registered. So this one could maybe be for all of you, and maybe Ashwathi and I also have a story to share, but the question was, have you seen instances in which greater public exposure led to discovery of or invitations to funding opportunities? So basically having something open source led to more awareness and use and uptake of it than probably had it not been open sourced.
I can tell you, Diamond is a perfect example of that. So when we created the Diamond portal, everyone in the consortium, in the CTSA consortium, liked the idea of having it, but since then it has had wide uptake. In fact, we're in a funding cycle right now for Clinical and Translational Sciences Awards, and Diamond has been cited in almost all of those new awards that have been submitted. So absolutely, it has been a game changer for us.
Brenda, I have a follow-up question there. Were there specific activities that you undertook in order to increase the public exposure and traction of the materials that you were creating?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So when we first developed Diamond back in 2018, we had a series of town hall events where we demonstrated Diamond and showed people what the features were and how it worked and things like that. Every year we have a conference, an annual conference that we go to. Typically it's in Washington, D.C. And in 2019 and 2020, I actually brought 14 laptop computers with me, and we set up a station and we allowed people to type things in and play with Diamond and see how it works. So we were able to get the word out that way. We have presented posters about Diamond. We've published papers about the Diamond portal, about what it took to create that and how the process we went through to do that. And we also make slides available. So if someone else wants to talk about it, so for instance, we had someone from Cleveland Clinic reach out to us and want to talk to their health officers about Diamond and how to use it. And so we provide information to them about how to use it and what it is.
Thank you. I have another little story that I could share. There was a project that I helped with, and it was called Great First Eight. I can put the link for it on the chat, but it was a project that was created in the School of Education at the University of Michigan, and it's a full all-day open source curriculum that was kind of developed for children birth through age 8. And that curriculum is released fully open sourced, and then has since had a bunch of other partner groups sign on to kind of help support the initiative, and is in some schools across the United States right now that I think wouldn't have had the success that it had if it wasn't kind of released open. And that was also released open from the sponsor who funded it, kind of asking for that at its project inception. So it's a really great kind of success story. Cable, do you want to close us off with a final question, comment?
Oh, I was just going to comment on, does being open help you get more funding? And so I mentioned how we work with funders, governments and foundations mostly, to write and enact open policies, open funding policies that require that works be openly licensed. And I can tell you that they have trouble sometimes with compliance. So they, require a CC BY license, and then it doesn't get done, and their program officers have to go chase people down, and it's a drag. And then sometimes they have to threaten, like the NIH, for example, a few years ago sent out a memo that said, hey, we have an open access policy. We have, I forget what the number was. It was like 44% compliance. It was below 50%. And the director of the NIH said, we have a policy. We're serious about the policy. If you don't follow this policy, the odds of you getting another NIH grant are going to go down. And within, I think it was 48 hours, they had 88% compliance. And then it went up to close to 100% compliance. And so, funders, they have to do that kind of pushing anyway. But I can tell you that from their perspective, when you apply for funding and part of your application says, hey, I know about open. I already publish my research openly. I have, many people say, I've taken the CC certificate course. I know how to do this well. I have, I publish my educational resources as open educational resources. I'm a safe bet on compliance when it comes to your funding requirement. You don't have to worry about me. Funders love that. And all other things being equal, that gives you a leg up in the funding competition. Because they really dislike non-compliance on their policies, any of their funding requirements, but especially on their open requirement, because they're very excited about increasing the impact of the money they're putting out. And if you can tell them that you'll do that, they're very happy.
Well, thank you so much for that. So I know we're just nearing at 2 o'clock right now. So I'd just like to thank everyone so much for coming to the webinar. If you had any questions about the topics today, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're all happy to answer them. If you're a Michigan researcher and you want to have questions about copyright or dissemination strategies for your work, or how to get in touch with us, and tools and funding opportunities that we might know of to support the future work that you want to develop, please get in touch with Innovation Partnerships. We're happy to help. And again, I'd like to thank so much our speakers for their time and efforts today, and we will share the recording afterwards. Thank you so much.